Okay, I think it's 10 o'clock. Ready to start? Okay, we'll start. Perfect. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ivan Strackenberger from InBloom. Thank you for joining us, I think, with the first breakout session at the conference. So thank you for choosing us. I know there's a lot of competition. So I'm going to try to do is to give you, with Sharon Bates here, who's the Chief Product Officer, a quick presentation of what InBloom is, so we have time for questions. Just a quick poll, who in the room doesn't know anything about InBloom? Okay, good, okay, good. It's fine, there is nothing wrong with that, it's fine. So, okay, good. Just want to calibrate things a little bit. And who is the expert on what InBloom does, even more than I am? Okay. Be my guest, it's fine. So, good, I want to make sure we have time for questions. I'm going to go quickly through these few slides. I'm going to start with a quick video to show you what we're trying to achieve with InBloom. As I mentioned here, as mentioned before, Sharon Bates here next to me is our Chief Product Officer. She's to a large extent the brain behind InBloom. She's the expert on the data model, security, system, and so on. So the plan is not to have a very detailed technical questions, but if you have technical questions on API, model, and things like this, Sharon is a great person to talk on that. And she will take a few minutes during my session to explain a little more how InBloom is structured. Good. So before I start, let me show you a quick video to show you how we think the classroom could be in the future today. So let me start with that. So it's interesting. When we did this video about a month ago, the goal was for us to try to explain what InBloom does. Interesting thing on this video, we do all of that and none of that. Let me explain what I mean by this. We make those things possible. We don't build any applications. We don't provide any of these tools. We provide the plumbing in the back to help those of you here who are partners, developers, vendors, to make it happen, to connect this application. That's what InBloom does. We had an interesting debate about this video on the name. And half of us basically wanted to call it the classroom of the future. And half of us, including myself, wanted to call it the classroom of today. Why? Because everything you see in this video can be done today. Actually, none of this is real applications. We didn't want to pick one part or the other. But everything you see here pretty much exists today or could exist literally in the next few weeks. So, but it does not. When you look at the classroom today, they're very different. The classroom hasn't changed much. So what's the reason for that? And that's what InBloom tried to achieve. InBloom is trying basically to make that possible, to provide the environment for great application developers to provide these cool applications in the classroom today. When we step back a little bit about the vision for InBloom, it's all about personalized learning. You've heard, and there will be more sessions on blended learning, the flipped classroom, student-centered model, adaptive learning. And when you look at all these concepts, they share one thing. They have one thing in common: the idea of personalized learning, the idea that every single student learns differently and potentially should have access to a personalized and individualized learning path. That's a big vision there. Personalized learning happens today in the classroom on a small scale. The question is how you make that happen on a large scale. And that's, again, what In Bloom is doing. And Sharon will tell you a little bit, how it works and what's the structure for that. We think that this model is based on two fundamental things. One is collaboration between all the people involved in education, the teachers, the parents, the students, the administrators. And the second part is integration of all these tools. Today, the big problem you have, one of the big issues you have is none of the systems talk to each other. You have big silos, and nothing works with anything. So you can come up with the best application in the world, the most beautiful dashboard, the best assessment tool. Ultimately, most likely will make the life of the teacher more difficult. It's another login, another password. It's another system to use. And it's where the difference is between data and information. And within Bloom, again, we're trying to transform data into information. We're trying to save time for the teachers and really enable true personalized learning on a large scale. So let me ask Sharon to give you a quick rundown of what In Bloom really is. I've tried to tell you basically why In Bloom, and I'll tell you some of the benefits afterwards, but the key thing is to understand basically what In Bloom is and what In Bloom does. So Sharon, you want to take that?
Sure, I'm happy to. So hi folks, nice to see all of you. If you were to ask kind of the pointed question, what does In Bloom do? I would say that we're an interoperability services company. And you would say, what the heck is that? Which is a very, very rational follow-up question. If you think about interoperability as from kind of the user's perspective and from the teacher's perspective specifically, you can imagine that you'd want information from all of the different tools that you use in your classroom to inform all the best content that's available to you from all over the internet, right? And you'd think about all the individual great math applications, literacy applications, collaboration applications that you want to use in your classroom, but it takes you 2 hours to log into each of those different systems, download reports, create your plan for personalized learning for the next day, for the next week. The technology needs to do better than that, right? And when you think about kind of search from a teacher's perspective, you know that you need to reteach a lesson around long division and remainders. So what do? Right? You open your textbook, that's one source. You open Google, that's another source, but when you search for long division and remainders, Google doesn't know what Common Core standard that aligns to. It doesn't know that it's, for you, 6th grade math. The search engines just don't have enough contextual information to support search at scale for teachers, for kids, for parents. And so when we talk about interoperability services, that's the interoperability we're talking about. So In Bloom offers secure data services and content services that, just like Yvonne said, lives kind of behind the scenes on the back end, connecting all the great tools that teachers, kids, and families use in the classroom. So on the data side, you almost have to think for a minute about what it's like to be a data administrator in a large district, right? You know that personalized learning is a big deal. Maybe you're here today and you're thinking, yes, I know personalized learning is a big deal. You know that your instructional leadership, your policy leadership want to see change, but you have a shopping list a mile long about all the systems you want to implement. You know that it's your job to launch them quickly, launch them on time, and you know that it's also probably your job to give feedback about how any of them are working, because it's all creating information, it's all creating data. You could invest in your own data architecture to pull the information from each of those systems and feed them to each of the systems. You could invest in the single sign-on strategy, you could invest in the hosting strategy, you could invest in the security in order to make all that happen, or you could use that from In Bloom as a service, right? And so that's when we get to, what's that data service do? It gives the customers in this from this perspective, the school districts and potentially states, the ability to take some ownership over their data architecture, but do it as a service. They don't expect to kind of be out there on their own, investing a ton of capacity in a piece of data architecture. So if there's a secure data service running that a district can store all of their source information, all their enrollment, all their achievement, all of their connections about which students, which teachers, which families, which schools, all of that source information that's required for each of the great applications they want to launch, if they could store that in a secure space and connect to APIs for all of the great applications they want to procure, it's going to save them, depending on the size of the district, potentially like millions and millions of dollars. Our cost-benefit analysis shows that, our relationship with our pilots show that, And so that's on the data side, that's what we do. We provide a secure data service for districts to sync, transfer, and store the great learning information that they have in their source systems, and they get back from all the great adaptive platforms that they're out in the field using, and the API to make that all possible. That's on the data side. On the content side, we really want to think again about that teacher trying to do a search. She's searching in Google, she's searching in her teacher portal, she's searching in her textbook provided learning management system, and she's just trying to find the right content. The right content already lives in lots of different places. It's just the search part potentially that's broken. And so we partner with the LRMI project, which is a way to just share metadata and accept that everyone talking about learning data should probably tag it the same so that it's discoverable. And we partner with the Learning Registry Project, which is another kind of national scale project around how can search work if we don't have Google, Yahoo, and Bing crawlers learning about Common Core standards, right? Because that's what they'd have to do. Instead, how do we get this information about which standards? How do they align to each other? What content is good? Where does it live? Who says it's good? Who's vetted it or not vetted it? How popular is it? How do we make that kind of metadata and paradata available to search engines? And we use the Learning Registry to do that. And so you can imagine millions of tiny little messages that just say, this piece of content at this URL is aligned to this standard by a teacher in North Carolina. This piece of content at this URL aligned to this standard was liked by a teacher in her portal. And that's all happening no matter what the front end looks like, right? And so it's when you finish tagging a piece of content and click publish, what that publish can do is store it in whatever content tagging system you're using and also just send off one of those tiny little messages. And those messages at internet scale become the back end of a powerful search engine. And we have an example of a search engine, but it's all open source. Anybody can do that. And so just to bring it back, you can think about really cracking this code of a teacher sitting in front of her 30 kids at a time or 200 kids a day, thinking, where are my kids? Like, how are they doing? And what might we do together next to help them succeed? Based on all of the different great innovation going on out in the field, how do you pull that information back in such a way that a teacher can take action? And how do you potentially, as the whole field, make recommendations about what's there to do? We know there's lots of individual application providers working really hard at the UI on that, on the analytics on that, and we think that's fantastic. We're just lowering the barriers to entry at the interoperability layer in the back end. So what's all the information that you'd need to drive your application forward? Where's all the great content if you're not building it yourself? Or if you know your teachers are using some content from multiple providers, how do you support search and discovery? So again, thanks for hanging in with me through a very quick, large description. And we'll take questions at the end, and you can always find me later. I'm happy to dive in.
So InBloom is, I was trying to be here to explain, because InBloom is actually complex, but you have to summarize in one word what InBloom is. It's plumbing. It's things nobody should see, things basically sitting under the ground on which you can plug great appliances. A lot of you here basically run companies, have great applications. We basically make it easy for these applications to be deployed very quickly and very cost effectively. That's what we do. We don't build, we don't sell, we don't provide applications, we don't provide dashboard services, we don't provide, we have a small dashboard just as a proof of concept, but we don't provide reporting engine, we don't provide any of that. We basically put in place the pipes and the terminations, the API, so that you can plug on top of that the application you need and make it easy then for the districts to connect all these applications. That's what we do. Now, for those of you who are more technical, there's a lot there. It's very, very dense what you have there. Sharon, just a quick word about the data model we're using, and it's a question that comes up a lot.
Of course. What we wanted to do was build on the success of the data standards community over the past 15, 20, 25 years. And we wanted to make sure that investments that states and districts have already made would interoperate with the service that we provide. And so our data model is based on the CEDS data model. It's the Common Education Data Standards. We interoperate with CIF for those states and districts that have an existing CIF infrastructure. We did that, and we were able to do it kind of as fast as we were able to do it by partnering with an organization called EdFi, who has their own specification of CEDS and their XML specifications, those kinds of things. The important question, to come back to kind of the top level answer, is that we want to make sure if states and districts have existing investments that they can plug right in. And so that's why we went to CEDS, that's why we interoperate with CIF. And we want to model good standards behavior as a customer, right? To say, well, that's standard, it fits our use case, thank you very much. We'll extend it a bit, we'll feed that back to the standards body, and just kind of build up a community of practice around not just issuing standards, but using standards, extending standards, and being part of the decision-making around standards.
So let me get going. So we have time for questions. It's a pretty short session. We could spend hours and hours, depending whether you're technology experts, a standard expert, and others. But just why does it matter? And if you look at the states and the districts first, they are spending today a fortune implementing those solutions. We have a district we work with. They bought a $45,000 license fee application. They spend $140,000 just to do the implementation. And that's a very, very common story. So these districts are spending a fortune deploy simple applications. As a result, they're restricted to only deploying a few big apps every year. They can't really choose the one app for the music teacher, the one app that really makes sense in there. You have a smartphone. You have 20, 30, 50, 100 applications on your phone. A teacher probably has access to 5 or 10 or 15, or at least officially vetted by the district. And it's a nightmare for the CIO, CTO. So we evaluate that a district can save somewhere between $5 and $10 per year just on implementation cost. If you take a state like New York, it's millions of dollars. It's absolutely massive. And for any district that deploy more than two to three applications per year, you save a lot of money. So we've done, for those of you interested, we have a very interesting piece of research on that topic. We did a very detailed business case on that. It's really, really interesting. So the district's excited about that, and we work with 9 states and 6 districts so far. New York State, Colorado, Illinois, Kentucky, Georgia, and others. I mean, everything's online if you want. And some of these states now and districts have mandated in their RFPs that they will only buy in-Bloom compatible applications because the cost saving is so massive for them that it makes a big difference to do that. So that's the value for the states and the districts. We can spend more time on that. But the real value for us, we think, is in the learning aspect. What happens for the students? The fact you can really have access to true personalized learning. The students basically will be able to see a learning map of where he or she is, where he wants to go. That would be the result of combining multiple systems. Again, we don't build the systems because we aggregate the data. We make it easy for innovative providers to make it happen. For the teachers, we have a district outside of Boston that use 34 assessment engines. They have 6,800 students, which still blows my mind, but anyway. 6,800 students, 34 assessment engines, which means 34 login and passwords, which means basically you have to print, you have to copy, you have to report, and so on. Think about the time you waste there. They have a very big ALL population. You have a big special ed population as well, a lot of turnover. It's a nightmare. in-Bloom was started after talking to 900 teachers, and what we heard again and again and again is we love technology, but it doesn't work for us. It makes our life miserable. It's too complex. It's too difficult to use. It wastes a lot of time. Help us on that. So in-Bloom basically was designed working closely with the teachers to understand how we can save time. Single sign-on, easy transfer of data between systems, full transparency. They want to be able to go back and forth between the system that makes sense to them. They want to pick the one app that makes a difference for them. That's what they want to do. Saving time, saving pain, and giving access to more applications. The parents. I'm a parent of 2 young kids. I have no clue how I can help my kids. I want to help them. Ask them every day, so what did you do in class today? Forgot. The following day, what did you do today? I forgot. So think basically, an environment where you would get a message telling you, okay, your son did X and Y in class. What did you discuss basically giraffe over dinner? Why did you take your kids basically to the zoo for the weekend? All these things can be done, except right now you have to talk to 5, 10, 15 systems to get the information you need. Think about the amount of innovation and cool applications you can build doing that. The parents want to be involved. They just don't want to make it, you want to make it easy for them. So again, if you manage to aggregate all these different sources of data, then it becomes much, much easier. So just close on the vendors, the partners, and benefits for a lot of you in the room in here. You have today to spend a lot of money and time deploy those applications. And many times the district will tell you, oh, I love your app, but it will take too much time. It will be too expensive to deploy. Think about a model basically where if you work with an in-Bloom enabled district, it would be done basically in a matter of hours as opposed to days, weeks, of months. That's potentially even more money you can get back into your licensing fee, and also cost reduction for the districts makes you very competitive. The second piece is InBloom is tackling really this big back-end and middleware piece. And when, for startups, you want to spend your money on the front end, on the app, on the UI, on the cool thing, on the visible part. You don't want to spend all your money on the big database in the back, the big back-end tools. InBloom can provide some of that, so you can save a lot of money and time. And the third part, especially for smaller players, as InBloom gets bigger, we have more and more districts becoming InBloom compatible. If your app is InBloom enabled, if your application basically is InBloom compatible, you can actually go to this district and say, Mr. District, I've got a really cool app, a parent app or X and Y that is InBloom compatible. You should look at my solution. So InBloom is a non-profit company. The code will be released open source. We're fully transparent. We will not pick winners. We don't tell district you have to choose X and Y application, but we want to be very transparent basically on who uses what. So we'll basically publish a list of districts that use InBloom. We'll also publish a list of partners that are InBloom compatible as well. So you can very easily find who is a good potential buyer for your application. And vice versa, the districts will be wants to know who are the applications that are InBloom compatible already. So that's another set of benefits. At South by Southwest, we announced 24 initial partners. We did show some demos of how those partners have used the API, the InBloom API, to integrate with InBloom. I think it might be on the website. We'll have some of our team members here. We're talking to a lot of partners here. The API, we believe, is quite easy to use and to integrate. So we want to make it as easy as we can for the partners to become InBloom enabled. So I really encourage you to go on the website, inbloom.org website, and look at that section. It will take you probably a matter of hours as opposed to weeks or days to make that happen. And I just showed a couple of pictures of applications we showed at South by Southwest that basically use InBloom. This one is Goldbook, where we have personalized, individualized plans that are based not on Goldbook data basically, but on data collected from multiple systems. So again, you personalize your learning paths not just on one tiny set of data, basically, but on a very large set of data. And that's the initial partners we had in there. We added a few more since. We have actually a lot more coming. And you can see here basically a mix of small companies, medium and large companies as well. So I'm going to wrap it here. The key things to remember is we're just here to enable and facilitate innovation and access to a wide range of solutions in the classroom. We are clearly not here to compete with the private sector. I come from the private sector, from the for-profit world. We really want to support innovation from small, medium, and large companies. We want to reduce the friction in the classroom to make it much easier to deploy those complex applications. And we really want to enable personalized learning on a large scale. InBloom is here to support and to enable that. You, the partners, developers, are the one who will make it happen. We just make it easier, more cost-effective, and faster for you to make that happen. That's what we do. InBloom basically has the plumbing. It's not very sexy. It's sitting on the ground under it. Nobody sees it. People are going to look at the bathtub or the sink or whatever. Maybe the wrong analogy, I don't know. That's the sexy part. That's what the vendors do. We just make it easy for your sink to be connected to the rest of your plumbing. Otherwise, it creates a lot of issues. Same thing in the classroom as well. Nobody will ever think basically having a separate circuit for your sink and your bathtub. In the classroom, that's the way it works today. You have these 30 different circuits. They don't talk to each other, and it's a nightmare. So I wanted to go fast so we have time for questions or comments. So yes, we have a microphone that can repeat the question. So.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll try to talk loud. This is a question more for the ed tech industry, but you're obviously part of it now. I was at a conference with the Saylor Foundation last week where we talked about hardware in American classrooms. All of this software is awesome. I'm a software vendor. They mentioned that only 19% of American kids have access to computers in the classroom. Of that 19%, 58% of them are actually laptop carts.
Yeah.
And of the 58%, only 15% have computers that are newer than 2 years.
Yeah.
So really 1% roughly of American kids right now, out of 55 million, have access to technology that's relevant. What are your general thoughts? I know you're not solving the hardware problem in education on this, given a million ed tech companies, but 1% of American kids running, new Macs or new
So let me give you a very strong personal view on that.
Sure.
People think personalized learning requires one laptop for child or one tablet for child. I don't agree with that. I think the technology is best used in the back to optimize the learning path. Let's say you have a class with 30 kids. You can have 25 kids using a regular textbook or being with the teacher there. And you can have 5 kids at the back of the class that do something more advanced or actually something different, or 3 kids going to a room next door with a tutor. So I do not believe personally that personal learning requires, no actually should needs that technology. If you have it, it's great, but there is nothing wrong with some of the tools we have today. What technology can do is to help you better use the resources available to you. Starting with the teachers, they are the most precious resource you have in the classroom. Do you want to use a teacher to supervise a test? That's a waste of resources. You take this highly qualified teacher, great, and the teacher spend an hour walking around looking at kids filling papers and bubbles. Makes no sense in there. You don't need technology for that. You need technology in the back to tell you, okay, we're going to use Mr. Thompson to go to the room next door and coach these 3 kids. So I don't believe the way, if we had to spend the money, I would spend the money on the connectivity and in the back-end tools, as opposed to spending the money giving a tablet to every single child in the country. That would be great, but I think you can do a lot without that. Other questions? Yeah. So InBloom, thanks for asking that. InBloom is a nonprofit organization that was initially funded by the Gates Foundation and the Carnegie Corporation of New York. We've received $100 million to do 2 things. One is to build the initial technology. It's a big piece of technology, highly secure, highly scalable. We're talking basically about a massive, massive system. And the second piece basically is to do those pilots, these first pilots with the states and the districts. The plan for us is to charge a small fee to the states or the districts actually to have access to the plumbing. And we're working on a model for the vendors. But again, for us, it's very much simply cost recovery to operate the system. And the reason why we want to do this is because we don't want at any point of time the states or the districts to be concerned about the sustainability of the project. So we're not dependent on philanthropic money. We funded to do that initially, and we'll get more, but we want to make sure that the model is self-sustainable. And the business case I mentioned before actually assumes a fee of $5 per student per year. That's a starting point. The plan is to go down towards 0 as we scale. And even with that fee, basically the district saves somewhere between $5 and $10 per year minimum on this. So the bulk of the cost is probably going to be carried by the district, but again, it's more than netted by the savings they make on the implementation.
You had mentioned in your remarks the opportunity to look at learning in the classroom and then say, well, how about go to the zoo? And so I'm curious, sort of from a connected learning framework and knowing that learning doesn't stop at 3 o'clock when school ends, how InBloom handles sort of informal learning and that more porous relationship between formal and informal.
The nice thing with InBloom is that we don't know what the future will look like. That's the exciting part. We're just putting the plumbing in place for people to invite the right applications. So if the districts enable outside of the classroom vendors or applications to connect to the InBloom database, you can do whatever you want. Completely. Again, we have to remember, we provide a service to the districts, and the districts decide which application they want to use and how they want to use it.
And then if I could ask a follow-up
Sure.
on unrelated questions about badges and sort of alternative assessment. You're obviously very tied to Common Core. So I'm just curious.
So,
is that also an agnostic perspective?
yes, and actually I was looking at your badge at the back in there. So we had some discussion like a couple of weeks ago with the Mozilla Foundation on this, and so we need to make some progress in that. Absolutely.
So we're technically agnostic, but from a vision perspective, very excited about the possibility of badges transitioning into really reflect the inside and outside part of school, as supported and kind of directed by a district. So if a district says we're going to engage in badges and badges as formative assessment, like that would be fantastic.
So then districts are the principal client. You don't use InBloom for sort of other learning.
No, we provide a service to the districts, and the district decide what they do with that. So we don't sell data or services to other stakeholders, because again, the data belongs to the districts. So it's up to them to contract and engage with application partners, vendors, or other technologies. We make it as open as it can be, but we will not sell the InBloom service to people, to other players, if that makes sense. there is a lot of policy questions around that. It's a complex one, obviously. Yes. I think we have time probably for 2 more questions, and then we have to wrap up.
Applicability to higher ed, obviously a Common Core standardizes on one taxonomy that you can know a lot about. And therefore, to a certain extent, Google could do that because it's one unified taxonomy. But obviously for higher ed, there's multiple different taxonomies, all of which are interrelated amongst and actually within a school. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, briefly, InBloom was designed with a clear focus on K through 12, US K through 12. But you could literally extend the model basically to higher ed and non-US countries as well. The model is not specifically tied to the data model. You can actually use another data model. There will be some work needed. The second thing is that it's open source project. We're going to release the code in the fall. So we could absolutely see an operator taking the code and actually taking InBloom into the higher ed segment. And I would think the amount of work to modify the system to accommodate the one or the several data models in higher ed should be, I mean, it's not trivial, but there would be a lot to leverage from the architecture and scalability perspective.
If I can add to that, I think because we talk about the Common Core as kind of a motor for innovation, there's just a possible misunderstanding that we are connected to the Common Core in ways that maybe we're not. We're actually standards agnostic. And so both from the data perspective and the content perspective, our data model can model assessment and achievement in lots of different ways, not just the Common Core. So we're excited to support the Common Core, but actually we're not tied to the Common Core, that both the data model and the content services can understand kind of wide varieties of different standards and taxonomies.
I think we have time one more question. I think it was one over there.